Luce, welcome. Welcome to the Democratizing SEO podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Very well. Very happy to have you on. Your profile on LinkedIn struck out to me, so I thought to reach out and see if you'd be interested in being on the podcast. So thank you very much for being on. For this episode, I want to title it "Non-SEOs are a requirement for SEOs," and get your opinion on a couple of things. But as I like to do with all my guests, I like to ask how one got into SEO. So with that said, how did you become an SEO professional?
So I've actually seen a couple of the past episodes, and it seems to be a general consensus from a lot of people that you fall into it, right?
Yeah.
And I guess that's kind of what happened with me as well. Yeah, it was a bit out of the blue how I got into marketing generally and then into SEO. So I actually graduated and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I didn't want to do anything in the subject matter that I'd done my degree around. And then I basically ended up working in a school for 2 years.
Okay.
And whilst I was there, I shared an office with a lady who actually worked at Microsoft in marketing. And we ended up collaborating on some marketing stuff. And she said to me, I think you're going to be like really good at this. Like, have you thought about this as a career? And I guess the next thing I know, I ended up working in a full service agency and dealing with SEO and PPC clients. So that was how I kind of initially got into SEO.
Cool, cool. So do you have a preferred area of SEO? Is it technical, content, on page, off page, or all rounder?
So on page,
On page, right.
yeah, so on page more so. What I find most interesting is kind of on page for ecom. That's
Okay.
the area that I find really exciting. And also like the technical side of things in relation to e-commerce as well. Tech has always really fascinated me, to be honest.
Okay. Why e-commerce? It's very specific.
I don't know. I think just over the last few years, I've just become more interested in e-commerce CMSs. So I've always worked quite heavily with Magento clients and the odd Shopify client as well. And in that process, I've learned a lot about those CMSs. So I guess it's just a natural progression from that, really.
Yeah, I think a lot of SEOs, like if we were to have a poll of the biggest area in SEO, it will most likely be e-commerce SEO. I
Yeah.
find that it's very broad, but I have experienced both within and outside of e-commerce. So whenever I find that SEOs are very focused on e-commerce, I always like to ask why, because it is a huge area of SEO, but I'm aware there are non-e-commerce based or should I say e-commerce focused SEOs around. And I find that a lot of the recommendations in the community tends to be focused on e-commerce recommendations. So for example, a non-SEO who's been in SEO for 5+ years might not necessarily consider PLPs, but they might know of what e-commerce SEOs consider PLPs. They might know it just as categories, for example. So it's always interesting to find out the different interest from SEOs. Now, in terms of teams, departments, you mentioned on page and also technical. What teams would you say you work with the most, or departments?
I mean, it really depends client to client because the working relationship you have with each client is very individual. So with some of my clients, I'm quite integrated into their business. So naturally through that, my main contact is the marketing team, but essentially I work with developers, designers, copywriters, and sometimes even sales teams as well. So yeah, I hate to say it, but it does depend, really.
Sure. Sales team. That's a very interesting area. Why sales team? I have a theory around that, but I'd like to hear your take on sales, because that's not something I hear often.
Oh, that's really interesting. I guess with sales, it's more that particularly in bigger businesses where they've got different departments of salespeople that look after a particular type of product, for example, you tend to have different teams. And within that, most of them have a lot of experience selling that particular thing. So they want to make sure from an SEO perspective that you're hitting the mark in terms of keywords and content about that particular thing. So yeah, it's very much they kind of, I don't know, their information and their involvement helps with the strategy and helps make sure that I'm going on the right lines.
Right.
And then they also discuss kind of the SEO with the marketing team as well.
That's music to my ears, because I had a theory you were going to say something along those lines. And the reason I wanted to delve into that just a bit is because, you know, we SEOs, we work very closely with developers, copywriters, even designers, for example. But rarely do I hear people talk about SEOs also working with sales team, and also customer service departments. I think those two departments are essential for SEOs, especially when there is a business that has those two departments specifically as a department, right? Because those are huge areas for understanding one's targeted audience, which SEO requires. And it's a beautiful thing that you work with those departments. It sort of brings to light that the business values SEO. Which is great, and it's not just considered as a silo team or area. How would you describe your relationship with the teams or departments you work with? Does it vary?
Again, depends on the client. I mean, with the clients that I work with, I generally, when I kind of have that initial kick-off kind of introductory call with them, I get a sense of what the team and relationship dynamic will be like. So yeah, I tend to pick clients that I know I'm going to be able to get the most out of and are going to be energized to do SEO. Like, for example, like I was saying, obviously the sales team is, you know, very involved sometimes, which, yeah, you know, SEO can be quite siloed sometimes. But yeah, I think everyone can attest to developer relations being a bit difficult sometimes. I think sometimes when you don't communicate in the right way, it can cause unwanted friction on both sides, and it can be quite challenging to essentially get across how important something is or to come to a solution for a client, because you can end up bickering about silly things sometimes.
Yeah, it's an interesting relationship between clients, SEO, especially when the SEO is either agency or consultant, and department within the business. I was trying to get my thoughts together on this one, because I'm still not battling, but I'm still trying to reckon with the whole relationship dynamic between the different departments that we SEOs work with, particularly dev departments, because I find that the issues, it's almost as though we SEOs need to be the one who who are responsible for the relationship dynamic. What I'm getting at is I think SEOs need to be the one leading that relationship. And the reason I say that is because client side, let's say the main stakeholder an SEO deals with, they may not know much about SEO, right? So their understanding of SEO is very based on the information that they have. So what they are aware of comes from SEO. So there's a huge pool or bucket of unknown, as people like to say. What they don't know, they don't know. So they may not necessarily be aware that actually from the very beginning of a project, the different departments need to be brought in. So when you have a technical audit, for example, the dev department needs to be brought in as early as possible. And I find that from an outsider's point of view, an SEO, either consultant or an agency, we sort of have this view that we deliver a tech audit, provide it to the business, and it's almost down to them to sort out the other part of it, the implementation part of it, and they don't know how to. So there is that understanding that, okay, we have the recommendations in place, but we also need to take it a step further and influence the business to, or should I say, teach the business how to go about getting the different departments together. Otherwise, they'll get pushback and they'll be stuck not knowing what to do. They being the stakeholder will be stuck not knowing what to do. And we'll have this area or cycle where there is a big period of time before recommendations get implemented. And usually it only gets implemented after there is an issue with a website, when shit hits the fan, as they like to say. And that's when there's a lot of infighting and the SEO is then brought back in to sort of like ease things around. Do you find that you have stakeholders who say different departments, let's say the tech, the dev department, push back on SEO related tickets?
Yeah, I think when you're just one, essentially SEO is just one strand, isn't it, of what a business needs technical assistance with. So you're always fighting an ongoing battle of, my ticket's more important than that ticket, or, but essentially, like, it's not like the tickets that they have for other things aren't beneficial to SEO. Like, for example, some of it's around UX, some of it's around functionalities. So it's not all redundant to SEO. We know that those things are important for a good engagement and a good user experience, and consequently ranking as well. So I think it's just a case of just, when there's maybe a ticket in where you think, oh, actually, maybe the priority's not as high as that. Maybe kind of say to the client, oh, I've seen that there's this ticket in, but there's a lot of benefit to be had from this SEO ticket. Is there a chance that we can bump this up in the order? But I think also another challenge is not all the SEO tasks recommendations, for example, that you provide are technical. And I think sometimes you have to look at kind of the overall roadmap of stuff and go, well, I know that this is a little less of a priority, but they can action that. Their marketing team can action that quicker. So, and it's going to have impact. So why don't we do that first, get that out of the way in the interim whilst we're waiting for said task, technical task to be done. So you can kind of reprioritize. Obviously, ideally you would want that high impact tech task done first. But it's just not the way that the world functions sometimes. Sometimes you just have to kind of, you can have that open discussion and say, look, like, can we try and do this task as a priority? But there's always going to be hurdles to getting stuff done. You can't avoid it, really.
So let's say a recommendation that you've provided to a client. What do you expect from the client once you've provided the recommendation?
It depends on what type of recommendation it is. So in the instance of the clients I work with, it's generally kind of generalist marketing teams within a business, and they either have internal or external developers. So in the case of more technical stuff, I kind of, through my consultancy, I do a bit of an educational piece. So I try and explain, why we're doing X and Y. And essentially these are, agree with the client, these are the next steps. But beyond that, I do a lot of the liaising with the tech teams myself and take that burden off them, because a lot of the tech stuff is over their head, or, they don't have time to do it. So I take that kind of element out off the client as such. There's not really much of an expectation there. Right. But in terms of kind of the stuff that they can do in the CMS themselves, then yeah, again, provide them with the deliverable and say, okay, this is like the next steps. Like, do you need support with this, or are you happy to do that at your side, basically?
What do you think will or could help speed up the implementation process client side?
Implementation speed, I think it depends on a lot of different things. Obviously, the more people you have in a team, the more resource you have. And in some instances, it might be beneficial for them to get another person on board to help with implementing. But realistically, for some businesses, they can't do that. So again, it's a case of looking at, okay, based on the tasks we've got, what is like the most doable, or what is the best thing to focus on right now, that will give us, be the most beneficial thing to do now to help us kind of on the ranking side of things.
Right.
So, prioritizing the doable tasks, I suppose, and getting those out of the way, and then really delving into the nitty gritty stuff a bit later on, or kind of in parallel with that when you can.
When you mentioned you have like an educational aspect with your recommendations. Do you find clients are receptive to sort of like training, or I say training, but more like knowledge sharing of SEO?
Yeah, I mean, for certain clients that wouldn't suit them. And, if that wasn't the case, then I wouldn't provide that kind of level of support. But most of the clients I work with are generalist marketing teams, and they want to find out more about SEO. So essentially they get an education from me as well as the consultancy, and they really enjoy that, particularly where there's younger members of staff as well,
right.
That have new into the industry and learning a lot. They find it so beneficial. But it depends on the client really as to whether I provide that or not. But for those that I do, they really appreciate it.
And from if you were to give just a general overview of, let's say, a balance or a level of what is enough information for them to not mess up SEO and not provide them with too much information, which leaves them with almost a state where they become the default SEO person. Where is that balance in your view?
That's a really good question. I think I don't educate them to a point where internally everyone's going to think they're the go-to, I suppose. I would never kind of want to inflict that kind of pressure on a person internally, especially where they're working in a broader marketing team, for example. They're going to be doing lots of things other than SEO, so it's just not viable for them to be the go-to. So I think in business, in the businesses that I work with, they always see me as the primary person, but they will take into account things I've told them when they're thinking about broader things, for example. So they'll be like, oh, we're going to make this change. What would Luce say? What would Luce think about this? Or, maybe we should just check with Luce, whether there's anything we need to be thinking about here. So it's more by giving them that education, as well as obviously informing them about SEO. I'm also getting them in that mindset of thinking about it more broadly with everything they're doing. Because I think with SEO, it's sometimes a real struggle, particularly with development and design. Sometimes the SEO thoughts can disappear or not be there. And then they'll put something live and then it's oh no, as an SEO, I wish you'd thought about this, or why wasn't I involved in that process, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So do you think clients need to, or stakeholders need to focus more on having SEO brought in early rather than after there is an issue in place?
Yes. Yes. I always think SEO tends to come into play with websites too late generally. I'm sure everyone or a lot of people that are watching this can probably relate to that. Usually you're looking at the site and you're going, why didn't they do it earlier? 99.9% of the time.
Yeah.
So I think even in that kind of state of when someone's building a website, they should, before they even go down to the route of actually picking a technology like a framework or a CMS or anything, they should be thinking, okay, how should I structure my site to make sure that it's good for SEO? Because essentially everything else you can build on top of after. And obviously, in terms of SEO is not something that happens overnight. You can't just put a site live optimized and it'll be on Google next day for your key terms. So obviously the sooner you get those kind of foundations in, the sooner you'll start to see that kind of sustainable traffic. And then anything else that you kind of put on top of that, like PPC or social, will just eventually, it'll just kind of be an add-on and a kind of an extra kind of benefit, I guess, on the website.
So there'll be stakeholders who view SEO, or no, there are stakeholders who view SEO almost the same way they view, let's say, PPC, social, other channels, right? And they think SEO, they get to a point where they're good with their SEO and they can turn it off. What would you say to a stakeholder who thinks SEO is a one and done sort of thing?
It's absolutely not. It just isn't. That's what I'd say. I think, obviously, if you put the strong foundations in, what you it will work for so long. But ultimately, what competitors are doing changes so much. The algorithms obviously are gradually changing. The intent of keywords changes as well. So there's so many changeable aspects. You can't just rely on, I've ticked off SEO now, I don't need to touch it again. That's just not realistic. There's definitely a need to kind of continue it, even if that's in a smaller form. There's always that maintenance that's required.
I'm curious, do you have a favorite team or department that you work with?
I mean, I love working with different departments, even the developers, when that's challenging, because I always learn so much from working with developers on the technical side, which obviously is great for my learning because, as you know, with SEO, the learning never stops, right? Mm-hmm. But I think in terms of similarity of thinking and a respect for SEO, I'd say copywriters and digital PRs are the people that I really like working with, because they're on a similar mission, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think we relate to them a lot easier than, let's say, web developers. There is something about, especially copywriters, because again, if we were to do another poll on who's the favorite team or department for SEOs to work with, it's probably copywriters. I mean, let's be honest. Sorry, developers, any developers watching this, but it's probably copywriters. It's because I feel like they get it. They get SEO and they're on the side of SEO. It makes that relationship a lot easier and simpler. Digital PR is an interesting one, because I find that nowadays PR work very closely with SEOs. In the early days of SEO, it was almost the opposite. And I think nowadays, especially when it comes to the outreach part of link building, acquiring links is best carried out by a digital PR person rather than an SEO. It's fine for an SEO to do the analysis, the strategy, even tactical work, but the actual outreach part of it, I think that's best owned by digital PR. I would say since post Penguin, I would say that is the case.
Yeah.
What do you think of certain areas of SEO or tasks of SEO being carried out by other departments? So now we have digital PR, which I think are best to carry out outreach. I am seeing early signs that some people are saying technical SEO is best carried out by a developer who knows SEO. So it's better to train a developer on SEO rather than to get the SEO to carry out the technical aspect of it. What's your thought on other departments carrying out SEO tasks?
I mean, if they've got the knowledge that's necessary, I think then that's fine. Obviously, developers are the ones that essentially do the technical implementations. So if they understand the kind of SEO side of things and how to implement correctly, I don't have a problem with that. But I don't think that's going to necessarily change tech to being purely done by developers. I still think that there's a place for technical SEO specialists. And it's really funny what you were saying about the link building stuff, because I 100% agree with you. That is the reason why I don't really touch that as an area, because link building, since like Penguin, the requirements and for that have changed, and what is perceived as good and bad. And essentially the best way to get links now is through natural coverage, and who better to do that than a digital PR? Exactly. So, it makes sense. If it makes sense, then yeah, absolutely.
If that were to happen, let's say in 20 years, I know it's a far-fetched projection, well, let's just say in 20 years, right? Where does that leave SEO? The reason I'm asking this, right, is because if every SEO related work is being carried out by different departments, where does that leave SEO?
I mean, SEO as a concept is big enough, I think, to have strategists, because ultimately the things that are going to be important to a technical SEO/technical SEO developer aren't necessarily going to be of interest to your digital PR link builder, copywriter. So I think there's still a space, even if SEO were to, the way that SEO is kind of done was to change as a model. I still think there would be that person in the middle, that like one person in the middle that would just go, right, okay. Even if it's like in a project manager kind of respect, they would still be kind of in the middle going, okay, this is like the priority.
All right.
These are like the things that need to be done on this side. I don't think we're ever not going to have that.
So you don't think the concept of SEO is dead will ever be true?
Not at all. No, not at all. Yeah, like obviously with AI and stuff, a lot of people have been like, we're going to get taken over by machines. There's going to be no job for us, but that's just so far from reality. Like technology's got a way to go to replace a human.
Every single year, in fact, I'll probably say every quarter, I come across an article or YouTube video or something saying SEO is dead, and it's just like, I thought people were over with this rhetoric. It's quite irritating. And it's blatantly just clickbait, and it's just like, please stop with those type of articles. It's not necessary.
The thought, just the phrase SEO is dead is just, it just makes me like cringe, like massively. I'm not gonna lie.
Now, going back to operational work, why should a developer give a damn about SEO?
That's a really good question. I think,
and I pose it because I've literally been asked.
I'm going to have to answer this very carefully. Because SEO is a core channel for businesses. Like, a high percentage of website traffic for a lot of businesses is organic, and in terms of value long term, it holds a long term value compared to other channels which you can just switch on and off like a tap. And I think a good example of where we've seen SEO be particularly important is during the pandemic, for example. So post-pandemic, a lot more businesses I found were wanting to start doing SEO because during the pandemic, they just didn't have the budget to have ads going all the time, have social going all the time. And those businesses that had invested in SEO, because although they may not have been actively working on it, they built strong foundations, and essentially that carried them through quite a tough period. So yeah, it's more sustainable. And I think that is a good reason, really.
Okay, so let's say I'm a web developer. at a retail company. I have my tickets for what I am supposed to work on for the next 2 sprints, right? And I have been given a curveball, which is SEO. And I'm viewing it as an SEO ticket, which is seen as a priority. And it's quite frustrating looking at this priority because it's not considered my, I'm not going to be judged on this new piece of work that's been given to me, right? What I'm being judged on is what I am delivering for the next 2 sprints, for the next month, right? So I don't view it as part of my work in a sense. So why should I care about this new ticket? Why should I care about this SEO ticket?
I think they've got to think about the non-direct impact that what they might work on more broadly on the site might have on SEO and essentially traffic. I think that should be the motivator, I think, in this instance.
Well, that's not my area of concern. My area of concern is what I have to work on. So let's say for the next month, 2 sprints, I have these 4 tasks, right? And with my boss, that is what I've agreed on. So why am I now being distracted from fulfilling my goal, which is to have these 4 tasks completed on? And so let me rephrase the question as in, who is responsible for ensuring different departments give a damn about SEO? I ask this because the SEO is responsible for making sure that other departments give a damn, basically. Yeah, the reason I ask this is because I see this quite often, especially with developers, and some developers think I pick on them, but I think I love developers, right? And even with the most blunt developers, and developers are quite blunt, I really enjoy working with them. I think they push back the most with SEO stuff, but I enjoy working with them, and I think it's not necessarily because of their I don't necessarily blame them for pushing back on SEO. I think they're in a situation where they don't necessarily have the support or capacity or bandwidth to take on SEO, especially when it's been prescribed to them, when they already have their set pieces of work to complete within the next sprint or next 2 sprints, for example. And a lot of the times I'm wondering, one, is it down to us SEOs with the way we communicate with them? I think it is. And 2, is it down to the business as well for not supporting both the SEO and the developer in ensuring that there's this streamlined way of communication to ensure that things are implemented? And I think so. And the reason I ask this question is because I think a lot of the times the brand, the business needs to do more to ensure that the ways of working is a high priority. Because operationally, if that isn't a high priority, operationally, you have a case where there is a lot of infighting, because things are viewed as SEO related tickets or SEO work. And because SEO is so unfamiliar to developers in this case, they wouldn't want to go down that route. They'll want to go down the route where they're more familiar with what they're doing, which is always non-SEO related stuff, right? So, of course, they will push back on SEO stuff because SEO is the one that's the most foreign. They have 5 pieces of work, 4 are familiar. And you have SEO related work, which they will brand as SEO related work, or sometimes they won't even be that kind. They'll just consider it SEO work, not SEO related work, SEO work. So they'll always mentally considering SEO as the outsider out of everything they have to deal with. So of course they will push back on it. They will always push back on it. And if the business isn't conscious of this dynamic, it leaves a state where SEO are creating recommendations. There's plentiful recommendations, and they're continuously carrying out workarounds, but not necessarily fully implementing their recommendations. And that leaves a state where SEO, and in this case, developers, are always conflicting with each other. And they'll be developers will be pushing back on SEO. SEO will be resenting developers. And it will take someone to intervene, someone being either a head of department or someone who's a leader within the business. And until that is in place, operationally, there is always an issue with SEO. Now, here's the thing. From a business leadership point of view, all of that work doesn't filter up to the business level until there is an issue that impacts a high priority business metric, i.e. revenue. And by that time, of course, we SEOs know it's already too late. The damage has already been done. And before you can see an increase in revenue, you need to take several steps back and fix those issues first before revenue can be rectified. And then SEO is in a state where they have to explain all of this to the business, where it could have been avoided in the first place. Do you know what I mean with this explanation?
Yeah.
It's quite...
Yeah, I think like the best thing is to just avoid it altogether by just having good communication. So, for example, like when I give technical recommendations for stuff, I will usually raise a ticket. And in that ticket, I'll go, so I've done this research. This is what I found. Like, this is an area that we can improve, but I appreciate that there's certain actions that might not be able to be done, or, there might be a particular approach based on the framework you have as to how to do this. Like, in order to improve this, what would you suggest? And just make it very collaborative. I think if you have that kind of collaborative approach, the respect is established between both parties, and essentially you can come to the right solution. So it never really will get to that point of, the senior stakeholders finding out there's been a rift between departments and stuff. It keeps it quite collaborative and, keeps the energy going, really.
Yeah. Within the SEO community.
But I appreciate that's not the case in every instance, though.
I find that a lot of the times, especially with the bigger the brand and the newer they are to SEO, there is this rift that happens operationally until there is a big detrimental issue. And in my experience, the detrimental issue is, of course, a drop in rankings. A major drop in rankings, I should say. And that's something that gets everyone's attention on SEO. And SEO then has to defend themselves and say, this isn't SEO's fault, because at that point, it's a finger pointing issue or situation. And several departments have to be brought in and discuss ways of working, ways of improving, but firstly ways of getting out of the situation that they are in. And it's all avoidable, completely avoidable. Within the industry, SEO community, I should say, I think we focus a lot on education for SEOs. What are your thoughts on education, SEO education for non-SEOs?
Yeah, so that's an interesting topic, particularly when I was talking about education earlier, actually. So I think the reason why the focus is usually on educating the community rather than those outside the community is because to kind of educate non-SEOs on the more complex stuff, you essentially have to know the fundamentals. And if you kind of research the fundamentals like title tags, H1s, and kind of how to structure content, for example. There's so much of that information online already that by actually covering that and then going on to more advanced topics, it's not a good use of time for people. I would say time is a big factor with this, to be honest. So time to actually do that rundown of the very basic level stuff, which you can pretty much find in Google documentation and on Moz and on other kind of online resources. So that's like one thing. The next thing I would say is, obviously with those complex topics, explaining that without context to a non-SEO is going to be like talking to them about the basics without them knowing them, if you know what I mean. So I think it's down to the fact that there's already such great resources for that, but also, it's just you can't really touch a complex topic without having to give context of previous things that someone could already know if they'd done their kind of research around the fundamentals, which essentially don't really change that much very often. That would be my explanation for it, I would say. It's a lot more time consuming and resource intensive to do the whole process than just focus on the more in-depth bits.
Yeah, it's an odd one because I completely agree with what you're saying. I would also add to that, it's essential that the fundamentals are known by everyone who has a touch point with the website that they work on or for. And as you were explaining this, I was just thinking, who would, let's say, Google documentation, right? Who would read Google documentations? It would be SEOs, right? So let's say a developer, they wouldn't necessarily have a look at the fundamentals because they would say that's not their area. They would focus on developers for web development fundamentals, for example. So
I think it would be about more, if in terms of internal education, if you're looking to kind of get different areas of the business familiar with what is relevant from an SEO perspective. I would say there'd probably be a degree of, okay, like these are kind of the key elements of SEO that are like important for you to know, like research around those. So kind of, I don't know, a guided like, okay, for content writing, this is really important. For tech, this is really important. So I suppose there would be a little bit of a navigating them the right way to the right things.
Right. So appropriating the education for the person. I like that. Yeah. Appropriating the education.
Based on their role and what they need to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there needs to be more of that in terms of SEO, because I envision, again, projecting to 10, maybe 20 years down the line, I envision a state where everyone knows SEO the way everyone knows about social media. You know, social media is just it's common nature now. And in fact, some elements of SEO, let's say search, the way people search nowadays is very different to the way they searched for 10 years ago. They are more familiar with how to search for something, right? And I think everyone who has a website will be more familiar with how to optimize their website, or at the very least keep it at a state where they don't mess it up, so to speak. Now, as an industry, we SEOs tend to focus on Google. Rightfully so. They are the biggest, they have the biggest market share, right? I saw on your LinkedIn, you have an interesting take on TikTok as a search engine. What are your thoughts on TikTok as a search engine?
Yeah, so I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with TikTok, which I'm sure a lot of other people do as well. So yeah, I actually did a little while ago write an interesting post that got a lot of interaction around TikTok. And essentially my take was that I don't see TikTok becoming the next Google. But I do appreciate that a lot of people use it for searching and getting information in a more visual and engaging way. But the key problem with TikTok, which needs resolving, is there's so much misinformation on there. And I'm not just talking about misinformation on the SEO front, which is just, if I could talk about that for ages, because that is a league of its own on there. But I mean, just in misinformation on everything. It's a big problem. And obviously, unlike Google, because they're a social media platform, it's harder for them to actually rein that in and be able to judge what's expert content, what's authoritative, what's trusted. Mm-hmm. So I feel like if TikTok could kind of see, if they're leaning to being a bit more of like a Google, if they could essentially facilitate that, whether it's algorithmic or putting steps in place so that whether it's like maybe verification in some kind of form similar to Twitter, for example, that differentiates experts, mm-hmm. I think that would make TikTok stronger in terms of obviously not being perceived as just having complete junk content on there. Mm-hmm. I think that's the key problem with it at the moment. It's a great search tool for shopping. It's fab as well. Like lots of people, even I've dabbled in a bit of TikTok shopping. I didn't see what the hype was, and now I understand because it's just so easy. Yeah. But yeah, it's for e-commerce. Like TikTok's definitely changed the game. And I think in terms of learning, a lot of people use it as a learning tool, but we just need to make sure that what people are learning on the platform is like the real deal. It's not a load of false stuff, basically.
Yeah, TikTok, it's something that's caught my, or should I say TikTok specifically for search, it's something that caught my attention a couple of months ago when I saw one of the latest feature that they had, which is almost promoting people to search for something. And I thought, this is quite interesting. And the more I looked into it, I realized, they have a strategy here. And the more I delved into that, I realized, they're going after the younger generation, right? The people coming up is, I think, Gen Alpha. They're going after that generation and the ones younger. And I looked at the bigger picture and thought, okay, they're probably trying to compete with Google, but not doing so directly because they know Google dominates and they won't be able to approach it from that angle. So they're using a slightly different angle. And I think the next couple of years will be quite interesting, as in Google's market share is facing what I think will be the biggest threat that they've encountered since the early days of Google, in that people are likely to search with the platform that they are familiar with, that they use. And in this case, TikTok is aware of it and is promoting people to search. The expertise, authority, and trust, I think, and this is me just completely thinking, I have nothing to back this up, but I'm just looking at things and examining what could happen. It could be a case of the expertise, authority, and trust, and in fact, experience now, is judged by the individual, and who they trust will be down to them, i.e. them knowing about the person or entity and providing that trust in them. So as an example, let's say movie reviews, right? Everyone, let's say who's a movie fan, when there's a movie coming out, they'll want to hear the voices of the people that they have given that expertise to, and authority and trust to, that they themselves have given that to. So it will come down a lot to the personalities and entities that people have confidence in, especially from a TikTok point of view. And then I look at it from a Google point of view, and I'm seeing that they also are focusing more on entities now. So they're focusing a lot on entities. They're focusing a lot on personalities, and it's almost as though the information from a search engine point of view, they look at it as entities. From a social media point of view, they look at it as personalities and people. But it's the same sort of thing. It's all entities at the end of the day. Whether it's a person or information, it's considered an entity, right? From a search engine point of view. And that dynamic is going to be very interesting in the next coming years, because if TikTok gets it right with the younger generation, I think they could impact Google's market share, especially as we have other players in the game now going after Google's market share, whether it's ChatGPT or any other AI bot, being implementing that, and Google historically not being so good when it comes to the whole social media aspect of search. It could impact their market share. Do you see a world where Google is no longer the most dominant market, have the most dominant market share?
You make a really good case for TikTok. I think at this moment in time, it's a difficult one. Oh, you're really
it's all
just thinking about all the different things. I think that TikTok has a good chance of taking some share away from them. I also think if someone came in with their own another search engine, for example, obviously there was talk about Apple, for example, then yeah, I think those would be big threats and possibly ones that Google hasn't had before and could impact market share for sure.
Yeah, Google also need to consider Amazon, especially from an e-commerce point of view, because again, going to what I mentioned a moment ago with the way people search, they might focus their search based on the platform that they're using. So on Amazon, they'll carry out their search. On Google, do the same thing, and the same with TikTok. And TikTok is the new kid on the block, so to speak, but Amazon is a legit threat to Google, especially again when it comes to e-commerce. There are times when I even notice it myself. I carry out my search on Amazon first, and then I think, actually, let me broaden this and see what Google gives me. And then I go back to Amazon to carry out my search. Everything is up in the air right now. The next couple of years, from a search point of view, I think will be fascinating. And I'm eager to see who comes out on top and how this will impact both marketers and searchers. Another thing, sorry, I have one more thing that just came to mind that I want to mention is the way marketers and searchers or non-marketers are coming closer together, as in the more people who have websites, who know how to use social media, who know how to run a website, the more they become a marketer, so to speak, and that will also impact the way they search. So it's fascinating times ahead. The industry has got me very, very excited with all the new technology that's coming out. Let's move on to the community. What would you say you love about the SEO community?
Well, I don't even have to think long about that one. It's just so supportive and friendly. Everyone is out there to help each other. It's just such a nice dynamic by the most part.
From your experience with clients, what would you say frustrates clients about the industry?
Well, I think this one frustrates clients, and experienced SEOs as well, but people selling in SEO as a dark art.
Oh, yeah.
Like over promising and under delivering. And usually the clients that are wise to this are those that are kind of further in their marketing journey with SEO. I think that is a big frustration because, like I said earlier, obviously the fundamentals, essentially they stay the same. And then you've got obviously the algorithms and stuff that you adapt to and new things that come in now and then. So yeah, it's just a case of knowing and channeling into learning it. It's not like a dark art. Obviously, you know, people that have got years of experience working with different systems and different technology and on different kind of industries and client sites will obviously have a broad spectrum of what works for certain site types and what doesn't. But I wouldn't say that would ever be promoted as being a dark art as such. It's just experience, you know?
Yeah. Let's say you had a magic wand right now, and whatever you say, you can make happen within the next 3 years. What would you say every SEO needs to do better in?
Oh, goodness. I think there's always room to improve communication. To be honest, in SEO, I think one of the biggest issues in SEO, particularly for clients, is simplification. So making sure that you're not bombarding them with all this jargon and stuff and making what you're telling them as digestible and relatable as possible. But also as well, I think, as well as kind of that element of it, I think we're all quite guilty of when we're busy maybe not communicating as well as we could with the client. So I think communication, it's so vast and there's so much of it in different aspects in SEO, but I feel like it's always an area that can be built upon and evolve.
Yeah. Luce, it's been fascinating speaking with you. The year is still relatively young. What are you looking forward to this year?
Oh, well, I'm going into my third year of trading as an independent consultant. So I'm really looking forward to just seeing what challenges and opportunities are thrown up because every year is completely different. So that's what I'm really excited for. And I'm also excited to go on holiday as well. Get a break.
A break from the computer is good. There isn't a day where I do not look at a screen. I really need to get out a bit more. But yeah, definitely need to take a
head
break.
To some conferences.
Yeah. Although conferences is never
see some people, do some networking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Luce, thank you so much for being on today. Where can people find you online?
Firstly, thank you so much for having me, and you can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, and on TikTok as well.
Awesome. I'll be sure to have those links in the description for you. Thank you so much for your time. Have a brilliant week, and we'll catch up again soon.
Thanks, Austine.
Cheers. Bye now.